marketers, advertisers, how they're working with the bot space. What types of things are they doing to engage with their customers, potential customers, other types of users. And we have some fantastic panelists who represent different companies in the ecosystem and building bots for some major brands. Hopefully we sat in the right order this time. No, we did not, huh? Oh, you reversed it. I see. Okay, because last time we went like Fred, now we'll go from right to, yeah. No, I'll figure it out. All right, Clara DeSoto, you're the co-founder of Reply.ai. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, totally. Reply is an enterprise-level chatbot building and management platform. We're actually really excited. We just got ranked by Forrester in their top 10 chatbots for enterprise customer service. We're the only startup to make the list, so we're pretty pumped about that. Our focus really is on global rollout of chatbots, and we work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies to launch their, what we call, conversational strategies across many markets. So excited to be here.
Excellent. Since it is brands, can you name some of the Fortune 500 companies that you work with?
Yeah, totally. Coca-Cola, we launched Starbucks' first bot, Nike, Samsung, and Soylent recently. That's a fun one.
Great. I think I've heard of a couple of those, so good job. All right. Next up, Seth Greenfield. You're the CEO and co-founder of InPerson. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. My name is Seth. InPerson is a studio for creation of bots. We create bots for major brands with our own platform. We have our own NLP that is built in. Our core competency is creating natural conversations between a consumer and a brand. Our focus originally, when we started, was in entertainment. We've worked a lot with Disney, Paramount, Lionsgate, and a slew of all the major studios at this point. Our next move right now with bots that will be released in the next month is with 4 major brands, from spirits to different retailing.
Excellent, excellent. So entertainment industry, they can be early adopters of a lot of new...
Exactly. They got it early.
Excellent. Well, thank you. All right, next up, Allison Darcy, CEO and co-founder of Wobot Labs.
Hi, thanks. So, yeah, we created a Wobot, which is a therapeutic chatbot that delivers cognitive behavioral therapy in Facebook Messenger for people with symptoms of anxiety and depression. We just launched in June to coincide with the publication of a randomized controlled trial with Stanford that showed that we could actually significantly reduce both symptoms in 2 weeks. So I'm coming from this, obviously, a very different angle. Our chatbot, Wobot, is our brand, essentially, and our challenge now is to work backwards and use the other channels that are available to us to sort of get the message out and communicate Wobot's mission and values.
Thanks. And then last, Stefan Trockel, you're the CEO and co-founder of Mercury.ai, and you also let me know that you worked with major advertising network called Publicis in Germany. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the company?
Cool, thank you. Well, Mercury is just like we had it before. We are an enterprise level, I'd say, conversational experience platform. We're coming from a strong research background with our, so we are mainly focusing on natural conversational flows. I guess that is where we are heading in terms of user experience after if we got natural language processing right, now we think we got to get the behavior right. Yeah, we started a year ago and had the fortune to work with companies like Nestle, Mercedes-Benz, and Porsche and stuff like this. And so, yeah, I guess we are very much dealing with the demands for brands from the perspective of how they can extend their brand value through a new tool like chatbots.
Great. So I think the first question I would want to ask is, if I was a major brand like Coke or Nestle or a popular entertainment studio like Disney or a therapy app that's doing clinical trials with Stanford, why would I want to create a chatbot? What would be the value in it for me as a marketer?
As I hold the mic, I have a very nice, I have a nice story on this, because we're doing this for the food brand Maggi within Nestle, and they have this really long history from the 60s where people could call in and ask for advice on what to cook and how to treat certain ingredients. So they did this from the 60s on. People could call in. And then they noticed people called in with fewer rates. Not so many, well, millennials called in on that. And now the bot basically gave them an opportunity to recreate this thing that has been foundational to their brand from the 60s on, now in a way like in digital with the chatbot. So basically, I think the motivation for each brand is very different probably, but I think most brands are going in line of extending the foundations of what make up the brand value in terms of a new way that transforms the experience with the brand. So that's what Maggie did with the bot at Nestle, but I think goes also with others.
Yeah. Thanks for asking this. This is a great question for me. So because, obviously, with the conversational interface, therapy and therapeutics is also a conversational interface. It just happens to have, two people in the room as well. And that actually carries a lot of additional noise to it. I mean, we call it noise. Therapists would, actually use a lot of that information. But for the person showing up in a room, the idea that somebody, even, the thought about how am I coming across in that room constitutes some noise that is difficult. And to remove that is actually quite empowering. So this isn't just for therapy or for health in general, and behavioral health. But any conversations that are difficult, stigmatized, or in areas where getting help for yourself is stigmatized, the conversational interface offers both a medium that's fidelitous to the original intention of that exchange, but also, it is completely scalable and completely accessible in a way that, regular therapeutics aren't.
I think you hit on a very key word, scalability. Brands are used to speaking to the public as one-to-many. This gives the brand the added value of one-to-one. Conversations with a bot can be customized. It's about developing a relationship with every individual. So the message that's sent is not sent as if I'm broadcasting to a million. Every message could be personalized to that person. And what happens in 6 months should be affected with what happened 6 months before. Again, it's relationship building.
Yeah, I mean, you guys all touched on it. Companies can't afford to ignore messaging as the best way to cultivate those one-to-one relationships with their customers. Messaging is the preferred communication method for the largest consumer group on the planet. So anytime that you're reaching out to a consumer like a millennial, like a Gen Z, and you're expecting them to make a phone call, it's almost like you're starting off on the wrong foot. So really, this is the only way to meet customers' expectations on those messaging channels.
So it has massive scale, which is valuable. Nestle is doing recipe recommendations and cooking tips. What are Coke doing in a chatbot? Like, what kind of conversation would we be having with Coke? Am I having the conversation with like Diet Coke and Coke Zero, or how does that work?
Yeah, so our whole approach is to really think big but start small, and begin by piggybacking on those existing behaviors. In the case of Coca-Cola, it's sort of twofold. One, it's just like things like automating the redemption of prizes from the codes underneath the bottle caps to answering the most frequently asked questions, like how much caffeine is in Diet Coke, like how much sugar is actually in Fanta Grape. Things like that, and especially with a large company like a Coca-Cola that has a lot of those questions to answer, it's just a better way of servicing those kind of natural behaviors.
Yeah. What about for Disney and entertainment studios? How are they using it? I have looked at some of the stuff they're doing for Blade Runner, which I'm really excited about. So maybe people are too. I don't know. Yeah, tell us more about what they're doing.
So it's extension of story. It's an opportunity to develop the story with consumer one-on-one. It gives the ability to create gamified experiences, but then also to sell in a very natural way. If it's home entertainment and they have a DVD, a Blu-ray, digital release, the bot, having a great experience with the bot and then offering that to the consumer has value to the consumer.
Great. What about platform strategies? We've talked a lot about Facebook today. We've talked about other platforms. I'm curious what your perspective is, what you recommend to people. How do you go about selecting a platform? What is your kind of platform strategy and approach?
Oh, I'll hold on to it. Text works well in Messenger, Facebook Messenger, Kik, Twitter, Slack. But we see the upcoming platforms of the Echo, Google Home, Apple's Pod. I think you'll see Samsung and Microsoft in that area as well in the next 6 months. But then you have another area emerging of AR and VR. AR and VR experiences are not fully immersive until you get to interact with those things that are inside there. That's where this is all headed.
Yeah, for us, the decision has this, there's an offset about privacy and also kind of understanding where the user both resides and where, what that actually looks like structurally. So, for example, a barrier for us creating for Echo or Google Home is that, that therapeutic conversation is suddenly out loud and in the middle of your sitting room, which, can be a bit weird. So there's people doing neat things around that, like creating chatbots for within the car, therapeutic chatbots, so that, because it's a private place where you could conceivably chat. But for us, really, Facebook was where we started. There's very few platforms that allow you that much access to an enormous crowd. And the overwhelming feedback we got was that people really liked that it was in Facebook.
Yeah, I think we have well, I don't want to talk about the channels, as you said it all, but I think a big challenge we see is integration between, like identity integration between channels. So a couple of years back when we talked about websites and mobile and desktop and apps, as a brand wanted to know the customer journey across all these different touch points. Right now, we're kind of seeing that in a different shape coming with conversational channels, because the same user might talk to the brand through the messenger, and while on train home or going to shopping, but at home want to talk through Alexa. So basically, I want to have in the talk before, we had this great idea of the contextual model, and I think this is, basically both channels should contribute to the same contextual model for that user. So basically, brands will have the challenge to integrate identities across channels in order to service users in that one-to-one fashion that you just mentioned. So.
Gotta get another mic up here. Yeah, so we support all the major messaging channels that you just mentioned, but 90% of the bots that we make are Facebook Messenger and Web Widget. Just because what we see is that and now getting a little bit more into voice channels, but the brands that we work with, they see it more as an extension of their existing presence versus immediately out of the gate, if they don't currently have a presence on Kik, they're not going to make their first foray into bots on a channel that they don't currently own. And the other thing is that starting off on a channel that you already have existing traffic to makes it a lot easier to begin to sort of engage with those users. But yeah, I totally agree that you really have to that's sort of the best part about bots is that you can very easily deploy across multiple channels and just be wherever your customer wants.
Is it possible to solve the identity linking challenge across all these channels and stuff? Are you successfully doing that? Because it is a big problem, right?
Yeah, it's you just have to perform some element of authentication across each channel. It is possible. I don't know if anybody that's really doing it right now. We launched a bot for Patron on Facebook, Twitter, and Web Widget. In that case, it's not necessarily authenticating the user, but it's still providing. It's a recipe bot, so it's fairly straightforward. But yeah, I think we'll definitely see more of that.
Great. ROI. So that's always a big challenge for marketers. And I was curious, what you do to measure ROI, prove out ROI, what demands are there on you to measure ROI? ROI is a general discussion in chatbot marketing. What do you think about it? What is your perspective?
Totally. So how many of you have been in a room with a brand that's like, yeah, we really want to make this bot and we want to be first to market, but can we see case studies? And you're like, you are the case study. And it's... it's really rare, and I thought that was wonderful that the 1-800-Flowers dude was here because he it takes a brave brand to be like, yeah, we're gonna pave the way. When we get asked about benchmarks, et cetera, we're like, well, you're the benchmark. So when it comes to the discussion about ROI, it really depends on the use case. For us, when we work more in that kind of customer support, and we just recently won our first airline, which we're really pumped about, all they care about is the containment rate, which is a new term that I recently learned, which is basically number of chats that do not escalate to a live agent, because that ties back to very real dollars. But I'm sure that in your experience, when it's more entertainment-based, you're being measured on something completely different.
So we recently deployed, back in May, a customer service bot. I can't say which one actually, but it was measured against the call center that was handling tier 1 support, basically. And again, it was about what didn't need to be escalated. That bot actually was measured at 90% approval rate. We were asked, why did it underperform? And we looked at them, we said, what does the call center do? And they said about 75%. They said, but if you did 90, why didn't you do 100? I think that the advantage of a bot in these circumstances is the voice on this is consistent. I called that same service center 5 times, and I got 5 different responses from them on the same question. In this case, the return on that is measured in brand value. There is a sales part here that will be coming up soon, and we're going to see that more and more where bots are actually selling things. In that case, the ROI becomes very clear. But engagement is a tough one to measure.
Yeah, definitely engagement is a really tough one to measure, and at the same time, it's a proxy for outcomes for us, right, for clinical outcomes. And so for our what we measure ourselves against, I guess, rather than ROI, is definitely its retention, engagement and retention, which, in some respects, the retention piece is about developing, or the capacity to develop, a long-term relationship with someone. And we do try and mirror the dynamics of a relationship. And then, of course, it's also clinical reduction in symptoms. Like, are we actually doing a good job by people, and how quickly can we do that?
I think it's, if we look at what brands use bots for, I think we got kind of maybe, I think, threefold scenarios. I think we got these customer support kind of things, which you said is, I mean, it totally makes sense to value them like that. But we also have these kind of continuous services where like you just said, retention is so important. Another thing I think is what some brands do. I'm not really especially a fan of that, but these kind of really short-lived campaign activation things, where I think they will have a problem, because whatever comes after that will be a huge hole on their communication channel. But definitely there are people around that measure bots by sheer reach, just like we have in other campaigns. But I think that's kind of problematic if we see, because that high will definitely have a low afterwards when people don't find anything at that channel after that. So just put that also in this discussion here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good question, right? Like, ongoing engagement with like a branded app in particular. Like, what can you do to keep users engaged? Like, once I've gone to the Coke app and I know how much sugar and caffeine are in a single can, what do I do after that?
Totally, and it's a bot, not an app. So I think that, this sort of piggybacking on what Seth said is consistency, right? Like, to your point, right now it feels very fragmented across the different use cases, like customer service bots over here, marketing campaign bots over there. But if you think about how the consumer is really thinking about it, they're just talking to Coke. They're just talking to Maggie. And like, they don't want to know that, like, oh, well, now, it's the same deal with the call center. Like, oh, now I'm talking to Cheryl in Tulsa at that call center versus, the shiny marketing department. So I think that that's sort of the next evolution, is that it isn't just such siloed use cases so much as, creating a cohesive layer of conversational interface, no matter what stage in the customer journey I'm interacting with the brand.
Yeah, you want to weigh in on engagement, or?
Yeah, just really in terms of what needs to be there, brands do offer seasonal content. The television commercials are seasonal rollouts. A brand like, for instance, a Coke, that does have FAQs on there should have seasonal content there as well. At that point, it should be rotated out. One of the issues that you've seen the first couple of years here is, as you said, brands are putting something up and it goes stale. It's a big commitment for a brand to put it in. I would say for most brands, if you put something in like that, sunset it. But otherwise, you need to look at this as a long-term strategy.
I can add to this. In terms of ROI, I think we got it we got this statement from the CEO from Nestle in Germany who basically just said, well, we want to be first in market, and this will bring so many opportunities, like using this channel and being the one who really embraces this channel. So I think you can have on monetary as well as on brand aspects, you can have so many payoffs for this. But currently, I think they are just investing in this because they want to own the space in terms of the recipe kind of cooking domain or food domain for Nestle, I guess.
Right. So a big motivation is like first mover advantage. I want to be new and exciting and appeal to young people. So what would you say to brands that haven't embraced chatbots yet? Like, what is the incentive for them? Like, they can't be first because Nestle already is first. So
well, they can definitely find one problem their users have that they could better solve by a bot. And then if they can manage to really, really narrowly like put that out and then start learning from there, I think that's the best thing to do. And I think, as we have heard multiple times today, start learning earlier than later.
I think I would speak from the perspective of, mental health, behavioral health applications out there, and, digital health in general. Anything where there's teaching, learning, or therapeutics involved, just my advice would be just build an app. It fixes so many problems in healthcare in general. I mean, we've never really been able to evolve from this idea of like a physician and patient in a room until now. So, and it makes sense in a way to people that's just much more accessible. So, I would just strongly encourage people to do it.
I think for most brands, you're still in the space of this being new. I don't think they've missed the boat in terms of being first out. There's not 100 brands that are in messaging at this point. Across all the platforms, there's not 100 real bots. The amount of bots that's given out there is a lot of smaller bots that are built. There's not 100 good brand bots. So for a lot of brands, that opportunity is still there on multiple platforms. Whether we said a text, whether it's a voice experience, there's still room to be first.
Yeah. All right, why don't we take some questions from the audience? So maybe just show your hand or stand up.
Thank you so much, guys, for your input. I had a question about monetizing on the chatbot. Say you're selling these different categories to a brand that you have, but how do you make money? What kind of financial models have you guys looked at? Like, for example, does a brand pay you per message from a user receive? Do you get a commission of how much you're making a payout for them? What kind of financial models?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. What's the business model for brand bots and brand bot development?
So you hit on two of them. They do pay per message. They're also doing rev share. Us as a studio, we charge to build the bot as well. There's the hosting and maintenance fees. Once you release a bot, you can't just look the other way. You need to monitor it to make sure it's behaving the way it should be.
Yeah, totally. And I think that this is something that a lot of companies in the space are kind of experimenting with, because a lot of the companies that we're selling to are still defining, which department even owns chatbots and how do they make purchases. So, right, like kind of figuring it out too. So a lot of coaching and selling. So we charge a platform fee, and then there's also per message fee. But sometimes that can lead to not unpleasant surprises when the bot outperforms. Again, because of lack of benchmarks, nobody really knows how many people will actually be engaging with it. So I think that's it's still very much in flux, and it depends on which department is playing hot potato with your bot.
just like yeah, platform fee, I guess. But the interesting question is for when it comes to enterprises. I mean, they have different demands, and I don't know if it's all the same in Germany and like here, but usually they don't really like not knowing what they will pay at the end of the year. So basically, you will have to give them an all-inclusive fee, but that covers obviously your own risk, but also their total volume of messages, which is kind of a gamble at the moment because you don't know how many users will really go into the bot.
What is the business model for your app, since it's not necessarily a service that a large brand is, or maybe it is, I don't know. Like,
we do a subscription service, $39 a month after 2 weeks of a free trial, basically. But yeah, I was just thinking as you were speaking about what it would look like if we were to partner with other companies, digital health space, and like how would we integrate that? And I do not have an answer.
So you just charge the end user a one-time fee?
We don't. We charge a subscription monthly fee. Yeah, yeah.
I think, Seth, you brought up a really good point, which is that you're never really just building the bot. It's sort of everything else that comes after that I think a lot of brands, again, need to be sort of coached through. That like this isn't like buying another piece of technology that they're familiar with, like building an app where you give someone a brief, they go in the Batcave, they come back with a finished app. Maybe you'll release some updates. This really is a living, breathing, not literally, endeavor that you have to constantly be optimizing and updating. So that's sort of really the biggest challenge is kind of, training the company that this is something that is, constantly evolving and should be paid for as in that way, or rather that should be budgeted kind of not so front-ended.
Which is funny because exactly that makes it pretty hard for the buying departments to buy these kind of I think SaaS in general, but I find it for like chatbot platforms because they are not really accustomed to that. They really know how well to buy agency work, but they're not really good right now in making purchases for SaaS or these kind of combined SaaS with ongoing maintenance. So basically, they have to buy into, I don't know, sprint team volume or something like that. So so you're getting into some really interesting questions of how to do that on enterprise purchasing.
All right, another question? Yes? What roles are required to support? You mean by personnel? Yes. So what do you need to support a chatbot once you've launched one?
Again, it depends on the platform that you're authoring it on. I can tell you for us, the system itself flags issues within conversations, but it does take monitoring from there. Okay, was there understanding that needs in the NLP that needs to be changed or fixed? The responses that the bot doesn't have to certain issues, at that point you need to go back to the brand and say, okay, do you want to address these? It's not just a matter of writing them straight in. The brand needs to approve them and even know if they want to address these issues.
Totally. When we launched Kia's bot, at no point did they want to, mention Tesla, but they kept getting questions about how does this compare to a Tesla. So it's, they were like, all right, well, we have a choice here. We're going to continue to ignore it. We're going to lean into it, and we're going to come up with a great response. So, and I think the other big rule is like, since optimization is such a critical piece, and you have to be looking at those logs and and analyzing the drop-off points. You have to have a very strong stomach because people are very mean to bots. It is terrifying. When Westworld first came out, my biggest complaint was that I couldn't believe that they should have spent an entire season just on the fact that we live in this world where people pay 40 grand a day to go and rape and kill robots. But then all I have to do is look at my logs, and I'm like, that's actually not that big of a leap. People are so mean. What do you see with Disney?
So we have very strong intents that we've created at the beginning for this abusive behavior, especially with the major brands. We've wanted to take this in and give the brands the choice of how they want to respond to this. Do they want to respond? Most brands have chosen to take it as an invalid input. We look for all different types of language. We had one bot where users tried to test it to see what would happen if they told them they were going to kill themselves. In which case, it was a major test, but we created a suicide intent at that point on the bot in order to handle these, including understanding that users are going to say this by saying, I'm going to drink Clorox. So there's a lot, that goes into the monitoring of these bots.
Yeah, this came out another panel I had done on AI and the idea of like rights for bots, because it looks like the reality is that people are actually going to go and kill bots rather than the Terminator come for us, at least for the next maybe 10 years. Depends how far Google gets with that presentation.
Yeah, I had the exact same reaction to Westworld too. I was like, really? This is humans in a natural state? Oh, right, then I lost World 1. Oh, okay, yeah, it is. Yeah, we have that amplified, right? Because we are literally, by definition, we are creating a platform where it's safe to share really dark stuff, and we have to constantly challenge ourselves as clinicians and as app developers, as bot developers, and constantly check the precision and recall all the time. We definitely want to over-trigger crisis events. And yeah, Clorox, it's so funny, and all of the pharma, any over-the-counter medication sparks a crisis. So you just can't kind of talk to aspirin about Wobot because they'll freak out. Yeah, that's it. It's a QA thing. We're very cross-functional, so we try and have all the developer, all of our data scientists, everybody is constantly thinking about this, so we can just be really adaptive really quickly. Yeah.
Well, maybe not a role necessarily on the client side, but generally, I think a role that is becoming more and more important, or coming into existence probably, is that of, I would say, like a conversational UX writer. So I think because the role is very distinct from a classical copywriter, and it demands a lot of traits, but it's not identical to a UI designer, because it's much more, well, it's text, it's words, not graphics. So I think having someone who writes good code that makes good dialogues, basically, I think, and that based on analyzing what works and what doesn't work. So basically, it's like a conversational UX writer together with a good data analyst would probably be a pretty good team to run a bot.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, one more. So patient compliance, HIPAA compliance, all the compliance issues in healthcare. Yeah, how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a basic question about what is our duty of care to people, right? So, which is quite a sort of a medical, clinical specific problem, and so we're not HIPAA compliant. We're in Facebook Messenger, so it's really hard. You can actually be HIPAA compliant, but you can't encrypt anyway. It's all complex. But the answer to that is we are as transparent as we can be. So, Wobot doesn't really have a duty of care in the same sense that a physician or a clinician would, as long as people are really clear, like not any more so than, for example, an evidence-based self-help book would, right? But the problem is that the conversations with Wobot look very similar to a conversation you might have with a therapist who does have a duty of care. So breaching that this is our one breach of that kind of simulation of a good relationship, and that classic rule that you don't want to come on too strong. The exception is our onboarding, which really is coming on very strong, and Wobot has to say, this is what I am and this is what I'm not. And he has to say, look, I know I seem real, but I'm actually a robot. I do not understand what you're really saying. I don't understand your needs. So don't use me as a way of getting help, right? Because there are some other crisis platforms that will intervene, and we have to make it really clear that we don't, because we can only do what we can given the constraints that we're dealing with, and that major constraint is anonymity. But even from our perspective, from an organizational perspective, all of the conversations we look at are completely de-identified, and that is to protect our side as much as it is to protect our end users. And then in certain points in the conversation, we're really clear if we are turning crisis detection off. Things like that. We tell them why they have triggered a crisis response. Like, this is the phrase that you said that makes me freak out. So just radical transparency is the safest route for us right now.
Any other questions? We're like a little bit ahead of schedule, so if we have another one, we're free to take it. No? Okay, let's just take a break and then we'll come back. You want to keep going? Okay. Are they ready? Okay.